Hi, I'm Mark Turner from Turner's Painting School. I gave an introduction into the fact that I'm going to paint, and I'd like to take this further with a lesson in how to use gesso. First of all, we need to think about what gesso is, why we need to use it, and how we go about putting it onto our support. In the introduction I mentioned the support and said I would use that word a lot. I've used it twice already. The support is what you're painting on, be it paper, card, canvas, or even on wood. Traditionally, and traditional gesso was made up with a binder, something to bind it all together, a filler, something to bulk it out, and a dilutent, something to make it run to be able to put it onto your support. And traditional gessos initially were only good on hard supports such as wood because they were brittle. So what is the binder of a traditional gesso? The binder of a traditional gesso would be an animal skin glue, and often that would be a rabbit skin glue. That's where they boil up rabbit skin and this turns into a glue, and when filtered off it makes an amazing glue, and it's still used extensively today, especially in refurbishments. The museums use it a lot, gilders use it. We'll talk about the modern day equivalent shortly. So our binder would be the glue, and then we would fill this, we would add to this chalk. The word gesso comes from the name gypsum, which means plaster, so you can see there plaster, and quite often they would add marble dust to this, and we'd get all this dust and we'd add lead powder. So that's lead white, which is no longer, well, it is still available but not used very often. They would combine these powders together to various formulas. They would mix in water to create a soft, creamy effect, and then they would add this to the glue to create a thick paste. And the paste would be then pasted on in very thin layers, building up 5, 6, 7, 8 layers onto the wood support before they actually painted onto it. As canvas was developing more in the 1800s, more and more people wanted to use the gesso on there, but that was called a half chalk. I won't be explaining that, but what it basically is oil added to the gesso to make it more flexible so it didn't crack on the canvas. Okay, let's have a look at the modern day equivalent. That is acrylic gesso. So again, it's got a binder, that is an acrylic resin. You can think of it as a PVA glue, a plastic glue. You've also got the filler, again that would be chalk and titanium white, along with quite often particles of plastic and water, same as the traditional. So why do we need to use gesso at all? Well, gesso protects the support, so it protects the canvas from elements within the paint that would attack and break down the canvas. So that's why we use it. It also gives us a better tooth for the paint to grip to, and it makes a nice surface to paint. The paint initially will sink slightly into the gesso unless you seal it beforehand, but it gives you a better surface to paint on. I want to just go back a moment to traditional gessos, and when I said they used chalk and marble dust, quite often they also used eggshells, but it was important to soak the eggshells in water to get rid of this membrane, because that was it was like plastic, you can feel it in your hands. And then this would be ground down into a fine powder. I've just ground some down here. I don't know if you can see that in my hands. That's an egg ground down, so quite often that would be added to a gesso. And the modern day equivalent is a white acrylic paint, and this one I've just put white acrylic paint in there with water, about 50%, and I've mixed it up, and then I'm going to show you how to actually put it on your support. Normally between coats you would sand it down, very, very fine sandpaper. And for cleaning your brush afterwards, you'd need something, a container with acrylic. You definitely need water, and for the animal skin, you would again use water, warm soapy water. Okay, let's look at putting the gesso on our support. Normally when you get a canvas support, it's already got a thin coat of acrylic gesso on it. That will suffice. But if you want to create a better texture, a better surface, I would always advise to put 2 or 3 coats of gesso over the top. I always add extra chalk to them, and quite often 15% of marble dust. It gives me a better shine. You can see the difference in these two surfaces here. Okay, let's have a look at what we do. So today I'm going to use this brush. It's hog hair brush, and I've just lifted it straight out of the water. I'm going to mix up my acrylic gesso, wipe off the excess, and start to paint onto the support. Now it doesn't matter, you can just spread it all over, but what I would suggest first of all is, once you've spread some on, is to run it horizontally and brush out a lot of the lines and work your way down the canvas or support, whichever you're painting on. This is a new brush and I've not had it soaking in water, so some of the bristles are coming out of it. If that happens, just pick them up and move them off. I quite often leave the bristles in there. It depends on what I want to paint. When this is covered, I will leave it for 2 hours, and then I will come back and I will work vertically and smooth them out. Again, it's ideal to lightly sand between coats. And there you go. Once that canvas has got a couple of coats on, I'm just going to pick up those hairs, I would leave it to dry for 24 hours before painting on it. That makes sure that it's absolutely dry. We don't want any moisture in there. Now, I'm just going to move on. Here is a piece of paper taped to an MDF board. Again, it's the same principle. This has had a couple of coats of gesso, and now I'm adding the random strokes. Now the reason I do the random strokes to finish is to give me lots of lines. That gives me refracted light. Refracted light is where the light's hitting the support and bouncing off in all directions, and it creates some dynamic impact. It's a little bit of GBH to the optic nerve that we're unaware of, but it's actually going on. So I always do it random. Again, if you want a nice smooth finish, you can keep it smooth and even sand it down to a nice smooth finish. Okay? And that's all you need to do for your gessoing. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the starting a painting with an imprimatura, also known as a Flemish bowl. And when you catch me in the next lesson, we'll start with that. So for now, thanks very much for listening in, and take care and look after yourselves. I'll see you shortly.